Yes, it is. This meeting is being recorded, and welcome to day 2 of Slipper Camp. We're using the same Zoom room for all of our sessions today. So you are currently in open educational resources and low-cost learning materials with wonderful PSU librarian Christin Wixson. We do have a chat down at the bottom of the screen. You are free to use that for virtually any purpose aside from Zoom bombing. So feel free to do that. We'll have some collab folks watching that since it may be hard for Christin as she's presenting. But we'll definitely also have lots of time for Q&A. So don't hesitate to keep track of your questions, and we'll make sure Christin has a spot for those at the end or perhaps along the way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christin, and thank you for being here.
All right, thank you, Robin. I got to start by asking, am I doing this screen sharing thing right?
It's perfect. Yep.
Good. All right. So like everyone else, I wanted to start off by talking about where in the ACE framework we're going to be. I mean, pretty obviously, we're talking about OER adoption here. But the other place that I think this conversation fits in is related to the high flex, because if we have some or a majority or all of our students who are not physically with us in the classroom or maybe even on campus, that really impacts a lot of the workarounds that students have as far as getting access to their learning materials. So if you're not here on campus and things aren't running the way you're used to, if you're trying to share your textbook with somebody else, or you're trying to borrow someone else's textbook, that's not going to happen. If you usually make use of reserves, here's a picture of our lonely reserve shelf collecting dust right now. That's not an option for you. And some people point out to me that the circ numbers on the reserve shelf aren't high, but the students who use them, this might be their only option for getting those, getting access to those materials. So, and I think as this pandemic progresses, I think we're going to see even more and more students who are not able to afford their learning materials. I think what was already a problem will be even bigger. And even those students who can afford to buy their learning materials might have to wait longer for delivery of those. I think we're already seeing that a little bit. So we already have the problem where it's, a week or two in and the students, I don't have my textbook yet, I'm still waiting for it. That problem might increase. And if we move to a modular course design, it could be like a significant portion of a module where someone doesn't have the material. So I think there's a lot of really good reasons at this point to consider those no and low cost options for students. So the first category that I want to talk about is the open educational resources. So this refers to just absolutely any kind of learning material. It could be a textbook, a video, a diagram. It could be your syllabus or an individual assignment. It can be literally anything you use in your course, except that it comes with permissions to do more things. So instead of the all rights reserved copyright situation, open educational resources are openly licensed, right? That's the only difference, right? They're defined by the permissions that they come with. They can look exactly like what you're using right now. So the mnemonic that we tend to use to talk about what those permissions are is the 5 R's. So you can retain an OER. So instead of feeling compelled to, I don't know, sell your book back at the end of the semester, because you need the money, you don't need to do that. You don't need to make that hard choice. You don't need to return your rental, right? You don't have those ebook rentals that just vanish, right, at the end of the semester. So redistribute, you can share copies, so the instructor can just share the learning materials with the students. So everyone just has it on day one, right? You just give it to the students. They can be reused in a variety of ways. And for some students, that looks like format shifting to make it in a format that's more readily accessible and usable to them. And the last two, revise or remix, they just mean that you can cut things out of an OER, you can add things in, you can change the order, you can take two and mash them up. You don't need to do those in order to make use of OER, but it's cool that you could if you wanted to, and we'll get to some of the ways that is handy in the future. Here's some, if you've ever seen me present on OER before, some of this info might be familiar to you. But there's a pretty large survey of students that comes out of Florida. It's all the students who go to public higher ed in Florida. It's 20,000 students. A majority of them say at some point, at least once, have they not purchased a required book because they couldn't afford it. About a third of them said that they got a worse grade because they couldn't afford the materials, and a fifth have said that they have failed a course. Now this is the 2018 data. I'm just guessing that as materials become harder for students to afford because of their own financial situations, these numbers might even get worse. But on the flip side of that coin, there's also a lot of evidence that using OER benefits student success and student retention. So there's a couple studies linked in the presenter notes for the slide deck. If you really want to get into it, you can go there later. This quote is just from one of them, and they found that when they compared side-by-side sections of a class, one with an OER textbook and one with a standard commercial textbook, they had a greater throughput rate. They had fewer people failing and fewer withdrawing, and the overall grades at the end were better. Which a little bit is kind of like a duh moment for me. Like if your students have access to the learning materials, they'll do better, right? It doesn't seem surprising. What was surprising about this particular study, maybe this isn't surprising either. The effect of those improvements was greater for the students who are most commonly left behind by higher ed, so Pell recipients and part-time students and minority students. Showed greater gains in those things. So huge surprise. It turns out it's a good thing when students can access the materials, right? Like they will do better. The materials are helpful. Cool. But I think some benefits that you see with OER aren't captured by studies like these that get at that revise and remix things of the 5 R's that students can interact with the OER in different ways. They can manipulate it. You could assign them to make additions to your OER or to make edits so that it's appropriate for the local context. You can have students do that work. So for those of you who are interested in I think it was the reduced disposability section of the ACE framework, OER is something that invites some kinds of those practices. So assuming I have sold you on OER being a good deal, how are you going to recognize them? Again, they can look exactly the same as commercial learning materials, but they come with these permissions, and most often those permissions are signaled with a Creative Commons license. You've probably seen these icons around. Good news, you do not need to become an expert on these licensing options in order to use OER. So all 6 of these licenses, they all allow a little bit of, different permissions, different activities. At the bare minimum, all of these licenses allow you to make and distribute copies of something for non-commercial purposes, as long as you attribute. So that's all you need to know. If you're not interested in the revising, remixing, any of these are fine. Technically, the top 4 shown here are the OER licenses. But again, you don't need to get hung up on the details. That's what you have me for. If you get into that situation, just reach out to me and we can talk at length about CC licenses. I love this. I think later today, Erica is going to go and talk about Pressbooks. So the folks who are interested in putting together their own Pressbooks, like keep your eye out for these icons. They at the very least represent content you can copy and reuse and integrate into your own work. Right, move that over there. So just like the work that you do to select regular course materials or commercial course materials, the process is very similar for finding OER. I'm not going to lie and say that it's like a piece of cake, but I will say I think there's maybe a lot of, again, I hate this word, opportunity right now. If you are revamping your course anyway, consider OER, right? Like it's the exact same amount of work when you're considering a new textbook from a commercial publisher, right? You have to look at it, is it a good match for your syllabus and your style, and all of those things still apply when it's an OER. So the link at the top of the screen takes you to an OER tip sheet that is a lot of what I'm just going to say right now, but there's some good depth there maybe. The first 3 links on the screen are to OER repositories. So you go to these websites and you can search within them and you will find a huge variety. You'll find everything from like tiny individual assignments you could use or pictures all the way up through full textbooks. So you can find a whole bunch of different things in there. So those are fun to play around with. I tend to balance searching there also with doing a regular Google search and just adding OER as one of the search terms. And the other thing that I like to do is go to the Google Advanced search screen, which is amazing and underutilized. And at the bottom of that, there's a limiter where you can say, hey, only give me those things that are openly licensed, right? The way the licenses work, there's a machine readable component. So Google can just go out in the world and say, oh, you only want CC licensed stuff or public domain stuff, and just give you that. Honestly, when I'm doing an OER search, I'll do a pretty broad like scan. Like, so I'll go into one of these repositories or maybe 2 and I'll search. And I'll definitely do both of those Google strategies and I'll just get a sense of what is out there rather than kind of going in on the first thing I find and trying to judge if it's good. Because it's weird. So the top 5 things I'm listing here, they all know about a lot of the same OER, but they'll surface different things. So the top 10 hits in each of these might be really, really different. And sometimes great stuff is buried on like a really low page on some of them. So that's why when I'm searching, I'll probably sample from all of these and just have a look at a variety of sources. The last link on this page takes you to a page on our library website that I put together. And it's got a lot more places to search, right? I just put my top ones on this line, but oh my gosh, there's websites you can go that just have textbooks, and there's websites you can go that just have images or video. Like there's a lot of options. So if you are the kind of person who doesn't mind being completely overwhelmed, click that final link and you will probably be pretty excited. That said, if you have a go at searching and you come up empty-handed, definitely reach out to me. I can see, I'm sure you're great at searching, but it's possible that maybe I'll be able to turn up something different, or at the very least confirm for you that you did everything great and I can't find anything else either. But I love to talk about that stuff, so definitely reach out to me if you have questions about that. All right. Oh, okay, side note, if you teach any of the classes listed on this slide, click on the link on this slide. This is OpenStax. This is a project to make textbooks for, I think, the 50 highest enrolled undergrad courses. And there was a lot of grant funding behind this. These are really high quality textbooks. They even come with little ancillary slide decks and instructor explanations of the problem sets and everything. So if you teach any of these classes, or if you know anyone who does, let them know that this exists. Go check it out, because I think you'll be very pleased with the quality that you'll find here. They're peer reviewed. They are basically indistinguishable from a commercial textbook.
Let me jump in for 1 second on that, Kristen. When we're doing this remote learning, a lot of the benefit of OER might be that we're using more digital materials than we used to anyway. It's harder for students to just go to a bookstore and get things potentially, and they're used to being online more. But afterwards, if you want to work with OpenStax in a print version, they're still super cheap. They're not free because students have to pay for the printing, but a lot of times they'll be like 20 to 50 bucks as opposed to 200 to 300 bucks for a big textbook. I just want to call your attention to the fact that the CoLab owns a almost complete set of OpenStax books that the library purchased for us, and or IT, I don't know, we all share them. The Learning Commons has these. They're stored in the CoLab, and when you look at these textbooks, you wouldn't know that they're not commercially published textbooks. So you can't get a hold of them right now, but once we come back, if you're interested in the print versions, as opposed to just like printing off your own PDFs or whatever, come into the CoLab, because we can loan those out to you. You can take them as exam copies and check them out. Thanks.
Oh my gosh. That was such a good segue. I didn't even like pay her to say that right now. But yeah, so these OER are actually really easy to find copy. Like you can go on Amazon and find print copies of OpenStax books. And I think that matters because students definitely still are, there's a preference there for print for long form reading. So for book length materials, we hear it in the library at the reference desk all the time. They want, if it's a book length thing, they want to hold it. They want to be able to flip pages. They find that easier. I find it easier. I think most of us do. For shorter things, they don't care so much. The articles or if it's just a chapter, they'll accept it online more readily. And there are studies that show this is not just me. I'm not crazy. It's not just the students I'm talking to. But you see this pretty widely. And there's also some evidence that students actually retain more information, that they are able to learn better in some ways when they have a print versus an online thing. So this is one place that right now, OER definitely has the advantage, because while OpenStax books are super easy to find print copies of online, any OER can be printed at cost, right? The cost of the paper and the cost of the ink. And it can be printed. So even if you are putting together OER from a bunch of different places into a package that's something that you need, you can have that printed at cost, right? There's no profit for these textbook companies. You can just get it printed really cheaply. I have to say the cheapest place I've found to get things printed is lulu.com. I'm sure there's more, and if you know them, tell me. I'd love to know if you had good experiences elsewhere. But Lulu was also, I think we found it was pretty easy to use. You just feed it a PDF and you make some selections about how you want it printed, and then they can print really limited quantities basically on demand when your students want them. So that's something to consider for sure. What else? Okay, I wish I had Professor X right now. So if Professor X were here, if he were in character, I can perhaps imagine him saying, okay, your OER are nice and cute and all, but the seminal work in my field is not available openly licensed, right? Or another iteration of Professor X might say, hey, my 4,000 level meteorology class, I can't find an OER for that. And he would be right. Professor X would be true. There are times when you need your students to interact with those like very important seminal texts, those very important things that they themselves are never going to be openly licensed. Maybe they're not in the public domain. The McLuhan book seems like a good example of that. I don't teach communication, but it seems like maybe that's something at some point you want to expose students to those ideas in their original format. Yes, there are times when you can't, you just can't get the thing that you need in OER. And like right now, I mean, OER creation is definitely growing, but I would still say the higher level courses, like the higher up you go, you know, the fewer students are enrolled in those courses nationally, the harder it can be to find OER. Don't assume that there aren't, because all it takes really is one dedicated person or one department, and someone can bring an OER into being. But for some of you, you will want to use these no and low cost materials, and you just, they aren't there yet. And I've actually had conversations too with some professors who say, well, I teach, I want to bring into my course voices who are underrepresented, and I want them to profit from, you know, the fact that we're using there. So that, like, there are a ton of totally valid reasons and valid circumstances when you can't or won't use openly licensed materials, but that's why we have a library, right? Bonus points if you can identify the room in this picture. So for those times that OER that you're striking out, please keep the library in mind. We have a lot of different options that can help you. And I'm going to run through them right now, and it's maybe going to feel like a lot. So maybe I'll start by saying it's okay if you don't understand all of these options and how they are subtly different from each other. Just know that you can talk to me or to any of the librarians. You can just tell us, hey, this is the thing I need. This is the text, or this is the video I need. And we can work through which of these options are the right ones for you. So that said, I think ebooks are going to be big for high flex situations, if you come and let us know what book you're using, we can tell if we're going to be able to get an unlimited simultaneous user license. That's a mouthful, but it just means everybody in your class in the whole school could access it at the same time online. For some books, those are pretty reasonable and cost-wise, not always, but sometimes. And we have a couple different platforms that we use. We've got pretty good coverage on academic publishers, but there's definitely gaps. There's definitely going to be some times that we can't find exactly your book. And I got to say, the more standard textbooks are harder to get because, you know, those companies are not going to undermine their business model by just offering the library a reasonably priced license for everyone to access. But it's definitely worth asking. So if you're interested in this, come and talk to a librarian and we'll see if we can get that. The library subscriptions link. So we actually have a really big collection of ebooks right now already. We have over 200,000. And we have, like, I don't even know, untold numbers of articles and databases and things that you could bring together. So if you don't want to talk to a librarian, you can always check out our subscriptions via the library homepage and just see what we've got there. This link in the slide to library subscriptions actually talks about how you can generate permalinks to share with your students, because whatever, it's different than just saving a link from the browser manager. So that info is there. E-reserves is another good option. That is where we pay, the library pays the licensing fees for you to share a piece of content just in your class. So, right, if we buy a library ebook, that's something everyone on our campus can access forever. If we do an e-reserve, what we're doing is licensing a little bit of content just for your class, just for that semester. We're happy to do it. There's limits on it, so we can't do a whole book that way. We can do a couple chapters. We can't do every article from the June issue of Science, but we could do, you know, one or two. Streaming video was another real big one this spring. We got a lot of requests for that. We do have a streaming video service called Canopy, and that's the link on the streaming video text there. So go in there and check out what they've got, see if they have the documentary or the film that you need. But if they don't, again, come talk to your librarian, because we are playing with other platforms as well, where we ask for a specific film, we pay for the specific film, we have access for a year. So there's other options beyond Canopy, but please have a conversation with us about that, because it might take some digging on our part, and maybe the sooner the better is good for that, to give us some lead time. That tip sheet at the bottom kind of describes all of these options. But again, don't get bogged down in the detail. If you don't follow anything I just said, it's fine. Just come and chat with us and we will get you onto the right track there. And so lastly, I just say you can...
What, may as well just answer this right here. Is it true that Canopy might go away with budget issues or have reduced offerings?
Oh, I'm so glad that somebody brought up the budget situation. Yes, I think it would be naive to not acknowledge that anything is possible right now. We haven't gotten any information yet about how the library budget will change. I'm assuming it will, and I'm assuming it's not going to be an increase. That said, I think it's pretty clear to me that we will prioritize the things that are going to support the teaching and learning the most. So our book budget might get cut pretty hard, but I think even then we would still prioritize these ebooks if we could get them into your class. And I think that we would prioritize the video service. I can guarantee nothing. I don't have it, but I know that we would cut a lot of things before we would cut the one streaming video portal that we have right now. When we open it up for discussion, I think maybe I have a couple other librarians in the room who could weigh in as well, but I think that's fair to say right now. So yeah, I think I'm more or less done. Takeaway messages is you can mix and match all of these options. So you can do some OER, you can do some bring in some ebook content with you can do some of the subscriptions we've already have, do whatever is going to work for you. It seems like that's pretty compatible with if you're doing any of the modular curriculum. Maybe you don't need one big coherent textbook. Maybe you can string together really good resources from a variety of sources, and that will get you where you need to be. So I'll just leave you with this idea. You can't learn from it if you don't have it. And I think the more that we can do to get students our materials cheaply or free, I think the better. I will be available on Friday, 9 to 11, to do some drop-in hours in the collab. But you guys should know that for right now too, there's tons of options for reaching out to librarians. So if you go just to the main library webpage, you can chat with us and you can email us there. And for now at least, and maybe forever, you can Zoom us from there as well. So with that,
I just want to put in a plug that if you email Kristen and ask for an appointment to talk about OER for one of your fall classes, not only will she make an appointment to talk with you about OER for your fall classes, but then she'll like dance around her living room because that's the thing she enjoys doing. Nicely done. We do have a little over 15 minutes for questions. So I think, so we'll just take them in the chat, but also it'd be great if you just unmuted. So Rebecca Noel asks, are librarians on 12-month or 9-month contracts? They are on 12-month contracts and none are furloughed right now. When I say that, I mean no faculty librarians, but you should know the library has already been hit pretty hard by furloughs. So a lot of these librarians are going to be pulling lots of double and triple duty over the summer, but they're all around.
That's another good point in favor of, I'm not trying to pressure anybody, but like the sooner your requests can get in for things like the e-reserves, because we don't have our regular staff doing that. It's us. So totally doable, and still make the request, please. But lead time is helpful.
All right, other questions about saving your students money or finding resources or using open educational resources for Kristen? If so, you can just unmute your mic and go ahead and ask.
Question for Kristen. This is Whitney Howarth. Do you know, Kristen, if the lulu.com will also print student blogs, like blogs I had my students do in a previous class that I want students this year to work with?
Yeah, Lulu isn't like a gatekeeper of what they will print. If you give them a PDF, if you can get it in a PDF format, they'll print it up for you.
Awesome, thank you. And then they'll send it all to me, or they'll send it out to students?
So I think at that point, you send students to the page where they order it at whatever the cost really on Lulu. I've been, Carrie, I don't know if Carrie Reynolds is here, but we use Lulu and I was like, we printed this really big biochemistry for nurses book, and it was still pretty reasonable. So
thank you.
Something the students will buy.
They do send it directly to the students, and they'll send you various links that you can send to them. You also, so Kristen and I had a lot of conversations. I didn't want to have any other cost associated with it. You'll set that. So it's just exactly what it costs to print, black and white versus color. So that was a big decision for us, and the difference can be quite immense. So it depends what you're looking for.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can, Professor.
Okay, so I was trying to get someone to adopt an OER, and they were reticent because they said, I want to support, academic authors. And the OER, they seem to think that like an OER textbook was more exploitative. They weren't going to get paid for it. Whereas, the author of a textbook that's, with an academic press, they're getting money, blah, 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 blah. So can you kind of talk about that? Because I didn't really, I just said, no, that's not true. But I didn't really have like more to say about that. And I would love to be able to convince that person and other people that that's not really an issue.
Well, I mean, they're right on some points and wrong on others. So it is true that an openly licensed material is available for free online, which means that they're not getting paid for the online versions. Some people do interesting business models where they give the free away, the online away free, and then they might put a little bit of a premium on a print copy. But here's the thing, this is completely voluntary. The use of the word exploitative strikes me as a little funny, because no one licenses anything unless openly license it, unless they want to. People who are doing that are making that choice. They're gifting that to the commons, and no one can make you do that, right? If you own the copyright on something, you still do after you apply SEC license, and it's your choice to apply that license. I would be curious to hear if anyone here has published a textbook and exactly what your percentage of the royalties were, and if you feel that that was in any way exploiting you and your labor. So they're not wrong that they're not getting paid. And I think there are some things that really shouldn't be openly licensed. There are some things we create with the intention of having a profit on that. And that's great, do that, right? Like that's why we even have copyright in the first place, is to give people that incentive to make new things. But we don't always need that incentive. I mean, how often do we create things just in the course of our jobs? And we're privileged enough, a lot of us, at least the tenured faculty are, to have the security and the support to make those things. And some of us decide then to share it. So I don't worry when I find an OER that the author has been exploited in any way.
And it's also
that element of choice.
that some people do get paid and should get paid for the academic labor of producing open educational resources. So for example, the people who write OpenStax books are supported by Hewlett and Davis and other educational foundations that pay them actually very significantly, partly because it's not royalties, it's a flat fee. You know, they pay them for the labor of creating those materials. So certain kinds of OER publishers do in fact pay their authors. That's different than like when I create a resource in my office. I consider myself paid by my institution to create educational materials as part of my job as a teacher. But Matt Cheney is fond of always yelling in my face for fun. If Professor X were here, maybe he would do it. He says, "Why do you hate books so much? Why don't you want people to get paid for writing books?" So I try to make a distinction. It's great to use all sorts of educational materials, but we are primarily talking about materials produced for students in learning. So if you have a monograph about political diplomacy or something, and it's a scholarly monograph that you've written, and it's not for high school or undergraduate students, it's just, you know, your book, we don't talk about that as OER. Like, you know, great if you're radical and you want to openly license that stuff, that's awesome. But we're talking primarily about things that are created for learning environments. And one of the key ideas of open is that we shouldn't be making the burden of paying for learning materials rest with the students. That part of the ecosystem of learning needs to find a way to fund that labor so that it's not passed on to learners who are going to get priced out of knowledge, basically. So other ways of paying for the academic labor would be stipending faculty to create OER as part of their jobs, using grants to produce what we need, and then having faculty update them as part of their jobs. So there's different ways of sustaining the model, because it's absolutely true that academic labor is not free and it shouldn't be exploited. So I think that's, you know, part of the ecosystem. The other thing I do say to people is like, hey, if you're writing a textbook and you're making a huge amount of money off it and you're reticent and kind of peeved about using OER, you don't need to do it. Like, this is not for you, because you know what, in 5 years, no one's going to buy their textbook anyway, because this is moving so quickly. People are probably not going to pay for materials when they can get as good or higher quality materials outside. So we don't really need to push back very hard against the very few people in academia who are making good money off textbooks and don't want to openly license. I think there's room for those people right now, and the way the model is working, we probably don't need to convince them. We can just let it be. It's my suggestion. Looking at the time, it's 11:15 and we have until 11:25. So we still have a couple of question times. I don't know, people just chatting about like textbooks and royalties and stuff. Is there any other question that people might want to ask Christin or the other librarians who are here?
Hi, this is Roxana. I don't have a question, but I want to put a plug for two things that Christin mentioned. You mentioned Merlot, which is a very interesting space where you can find sort of like course materials, but they're organized in courses. They're almost like modules that you can find right in there. So I believe that the quality varies. So you kind of have to go to your discipline and to your courses and kind of judge for yourself what you want to use and not. But there's also many sort of curated materials in there. So there might be some OER resources that somebody has put in a collection that you can use. So worth exploring. The other thing, I mean, Christin, you mentioned that upper level courses, you might have a problem finding OER resources, but I can tell you from me, I found very good e-textbooks from the library, from Lamson Library, that I have used in my graduate class. So you might get lucky, it might be worth looking into it.
That's a great plug. Thank you, Roxana. Yeah, I'm not surprised that you were able to find stuff. I think in business, there's good coverage there. That's awesome. And yeah, really do check out our ebook collection of what we already have, because there might be some usable stuff in there.
If that's all we have, I will, actually, I'm just looking at the chat. Yes, looking good. If that's all we have, I will stop recording. Let me put out one last call for last questions for Christin.
Real quick, Christin, fantastic. Love this. I will definitely be in touch about OER. So one big question, from start to finish, how long would you say it takes to take a class from scratch and make it a fully polished OER resource that you're happy to share with other colleagues at other institutions? I'm expecting this is going to be a very large number.
I would say it would take you exactly as long as it would take you to convert away from any set of learning materials right now. So like if you had a textbook and all of a sudden one day you woke up and you're like, this is terrible, I'm not using this anymore, and you threw it out. Because really the only difference between these materials is those permissions. It doesn't have to take any more time than it would take to just convert learning materials, just to switch over your textbook or whatever. That said, I think a lot of people that get into OER and they start hearing more about, you know, the non-disposable assignments and like, oh wait, there's really interesting things I can do here. If you get down that rabbit hole, you can just double that time because it'll take longer. And you know what else? I caveat to that I have to take back some of the first thing that I said, that it would take just the exact same time as it would to convert. Because if you're in one of the disciplines or at an educational level that there's not great coverage of OER, you might find some that, like you say, they need polishing. And if you're the one who has to do that work, it's a lot. So like unsatisfying, it depends answer. But it does. It depends on if you just want to purely convert the content, just take things as they are. If you're moving to an OpenStax textbook, that does not have to be hard. I know that.
Nick, we can talk more because I think Abby and I and a few other people in English, English is such a funny field. In general, it's kind of low cost, but also like replace your Shakespeare with open versions for sure, but nobody wants you to take like modern American authors and not buy their novels. So, you know, English becomes funny in interesting ways, but in some ways it's not, I don't think has to be that hard. But the other thing I want Nick, who's new, to know, and actually everybody who's here, is that depending on the budget situation, this might change, but for many years now, we stipend 10 faculty a year from Plymouth State to go through a full year-long program to do open in your courses. So we are already full for this coming year with our 10 ambassadors, as we call them. Carrie right here is, you can hear her talking about the biochemistry for nurses, which she's been producing as part of that program. Little emoji applause. So we can also offer you quite a bit of support, both financial and we have designers and folks like Christin who work with that team to help you through that year-long process of delivering some course. So we would love to work with anybody who wants to do that for the following year and bring you into that program. So with that, I am going to thank Christin so much for being here, and I'm going to stop recording if we hold on a moment.